Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. I Was Abducted, submitted by Sherry. This happened one night after I got out of work at Tim Hortons. I lived in a town called Meaford. You wouldn't know where it is. It's a couple hours north of Toronto. I had just broken up with my boyfriend and just wanted to go down to the water and have a cigarette and cry. This has nothing to do with the story, but he'd cheated on me with one of my closest friends, and I was really sad. So, I put on my iPod and started walking, listening to, of all bands, The Cure, right? How to make yourself feel better? Listen to the most depressing music you can find. It doesn't matter, I guess, but I was walking past a school on my way to the water, and I looked up at the night sky with tears in my eyes, and I saw this triangle-shaped thing out of the corner of my eye. I kept walking and looking up at it. I took my headphones out, but it didn't make any sounds as it glided overhead. At one point, it was right above me, and I knew it was real because I couldn't see the stars anymore, just this big black triangle shape. I decided maybe going to the bay wasn't a good idea and thought I'd go back and cut through the schoolyard to get home. I stopped walking, turned around, and started going fast to get there. And when I looked back, the thing in the sky was not there. As I cut across the school parking lot, a bright light hit down on me and I froze. It was like I couldn't move. I remember trying to scream and raise my hands, but I couldn't. But I could still breathe and all of that. The light got brighter and brighter, and for a minute I don't remember anything else that happened. When I opened my eyes, I was on this table like a hospital gurney. I wasn't strapped down or anything, but I couldn't move my arms or legs. My vision was blurry, but I could make out these strange things coming over to me and standing over me and looking down on me. I screamed out, but one of the things put this balloon thing in my mouth that filled up and I couldn't yell. As my vision came into focus, I could see what was going on clearer. The things were gray with huge black eyes, and one reached out and touched my head, and for whatever crazy reason, it felt like it was trying to calm me down. Another one was dragging this metal object over my body, and I soon realized I was naked at that point. It stopped moving the thing at my abdomen, and I felt a pinch on the left side of my lady parts. I then blacked out again and woke up when I was laying up against a tree at the last place I remembered being, the schoolyard. I want to state clearly that I have never taken any drugs in my entire life, and I don't drink. I wasn't some wino who saw some bright lights after a bunch of Molsons or Carlsbergs. When I got up, I looked at my phone, and it was 1:45 in the morning, 4 hours after I had gotten out of work. When I got home, my mom woke up and asked where I had been. I just told her that I would tell her in the morning and went to bed. The next day, I did tell her what happened, and for once in my life, she believed me. She wanted me to go to the doctor, and I said okay, but they didn't find anything wrong at first. My doctor suggested I get an x-ray after I told him I woke up against a tree after blacking out. When the exam came back, she asked if I had ever had any issues with anything. And I said no, and she said, "I don't mean to alarm you, but there's something strange in one of your ovaries, but it was most likely just a benign cyst." I wasn't in any pain, and she basically told me to watch for any pain or whatever and to come back in 3 months for a follow-up. That was it. So, life went on, and a couple of months later I went back, and the same thing showed up, and my doctor determined that it was a cyst that wouldn't likely be an issue. I was still working at Timmy Ho's and met a really great guy, and we started dating. One night we were messing around, and he was downtown, if you know what I mean. Then after my pleasure, he said, "I gotta be honest, I could hear something that sounded like a faint bumping." And I asked him what he meant, and he just rubbed my body and said, "I heard it when you closed your legs around my head." He put his head back down there and listened for a while, but said it must have just been in his head. But I was kind of worried. I went back to the doctor, and they wanted to do an MRI, and thankfully it came back negative. Since then, I've had 2 wonderful baby boys, and have not had any issues or anything since then. I can't explain what happened to me or why it did, but it did happen just like that. If anyone has any thoughts, please share with Uncle Jay. Thanks. The Thing in the Sky, submitted by Anyone But Me. Hello, I sent this email with more information that I hope you keep confidential, as it has a lot of personal information. A long time ago, when you were doing your Edge of the Unknown show on the radio station, I called in to talk to a guy you had on that was from MUFON. He said to get in touch with him, but no one ever got back to me, so I'm sending what happened to me again. In August of 2008, I couldn't sleep one night and decided to go for a walk around my neighborhood. I live in a town called Elma, which I know Uncle Josh knows where it is, but for anyone listening, it's a really pretty country town a ways outside of Buffalo in western New York. It was a fairly new subdivision, and my wife and kids loved it, and I did too. For the few weeks leading up to this, I was having terrible insomnia and just couldn't focus during the day. I was constantly hearing this humming in my head, and it would never go away. I tried all kinds of things to get it out of my system, but every night the hum would come. So on this night, I just got up and decided I would go out for a walk. It was really quiet, and the subdivision was just being built, so after a few houses, there was nothing but new foundations being put in, and no one out or about. Our street was ending in a bulb, so I got off the pavement and started walking across the grass and headed into a wooded area. Our neighborhood skirted on the edge of a golf course, and I, likely illegally, walked right through it towards a creek. While I was out there, the sky was clear as a bell. There was no moon, but all the stars were shining, and it was just calming me down. I was looking up at the Pleiades, and suddenly there was this big flash off to my left. It was like something came zooming into view and then just stopped. I looked over and saw this thing that all I can say is looked like 2 hubcaps stuck together. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't a flying saucer like in those cheesy 60s movies, but it was shaped like that. It didn't make any sounds, it didn't do anything other than just hover there, and I was on the edge of some trees just watching. This light like a spotlight came on, and it was playing all over the ground underneath this weird craft. I kind of backed up further into the trees because whether or not this was a government spaceship, UFO, aliens from Mars, I don't know. I was scared. After a few minutes of watching the light move around, I saw 4 figures walking around on the fairway of the golf course in front of me. They didn't look like the creepy shit you see in the movies. They looked like human beings. They were walking around with other little, I guess I could say, flashlights. And at then I decided I needed to get away, but I also needed to get back home. To do that, I'd have to go right by them. So I decided that I would go down to the creek, skirt around whatever the hell this was going on, and try to fake them out on the other side. As I was going, suddenly the trees lit up with light, and I started to run. At one point, I looked back and could see some of the figures I saw on the ground chasing me with their flashlights bouncing around. I ran, jumped into Buffalo Creek, and slipped on some rocks. I just sat down in the water, and I won't bullshit you, I started crying. But when I saw the lights at the edge of the trees, I kind of shrank down and just sat in the water, trying to be as quiet as I could. The light stayed shining around the edge of the creek, and then the giant bright light came overhead. And just like it came, there was a flash and it was gone. I was getting cold, but I didn't move for a long time. I finally got up and decided to get back to my house. I did, and nothing happened as I ran through the trees and then up my street. The next day, my neighbor Don and I bumped into one another cutting grass. Let me stress, I didn't tell anyone about this and even showered in our downstairs bathroom as my wife and kids slept, so no one knew what I had done or what I had seen. Don said, "Hey, how's it going, man? and offered me a Coors Light, and we chatted under the sun looking at our new lawns. Then he dropped a bombshell. "Hey, this might sound weird, but did you see a bright light last night? I thought there was about to be a plane crash." "Not sure. I was watching TV until really late," I said. It wasn't until a few years later I admitted to him that I had lied about that and told him what had happened to me. Without missing a beat, Don said, "Yeah, when I lived on the other side of the creek growing up, we saw the lights all the time. Even these weird guys that always wandered around with flashlights." My heart dropped when he said that, but it made me feel better. We talked about the guys who protect the golf course, but it wasn't a ranger checking things out. It was 4 beings looking for something. After that, I never saw anything else, but I wanted to share it with you again. I wonder if you remember our conversation from so many years ago. Whatever that thing was in the sky, and whatever those things were, I'm glad I've never seen them again. My Alien Story, submitted by Anonymous. I heard your call for alien stories, and I hope it's not too late for your next episode. Thanks for the last episode of The Edge of the Unknown you did, by the way. More of that, please. Okay, I went out for a walk one night after getting into a fight with my mom. My dad took off when I was about 12, and I never saw him again. I found out later that he died in a failed robbery of a gas station, but I guess that's neither here nor there. My mom had to raise 3 kids on her own and also work 2 jobs, so she was just a tired lady. I was the oldest at that point. I was 16 and my sisters and brothers were 3 and 6. Grandparents helped out when they could, so that was good for us. But my mom and me got into an argument about something stupid, and I stormed out of the house with her yelling at me. I just wanted to have a chew of my beech nut, just go out for a walk to cool off. I actually thought about walking to my grandparents' house, but that was about 10 miles away, and I knew I would never make it. So I was just walking around this park that was near our house, and I sat against a baseball backstop. Just sat there thinking about running out of town and figuring out how to do something else out in Portland. I knew some guys that lived there. And suddenly, that's when I heard a rustling sound behind me coming from the grass. Before I could even turn around, I felt this cold thing on the temple of my head, and I blacked out. Before I did, though, I saw this thing standing next to me that looked like a little man with big eyes. I mean, it sounds silly, but it looked like one of those things in the band in Star Wars. You know, that band in that bar where Luke meets Han Solo? When I woke up, it was 7 in the morning, and a guy who spruced up the baseball field found me in the middle of it. The first thing he thought was that I was dead, and he called the police, so that kicked off a whole shit show of police and ambulance and stuff. They took me home. My mom was pissed and told me if I ever did something like that again, I'd be put in a reform school. When she calmed down, I told her what happened, and she sat looking at me and said, "Wait a minute." She called my grandparents and asked them to come over and watch my brother and sister, and they said, "Yeah, we could do that." My mom then drove me out to a nearby lake and said she wanted to talk to me. Basically, she told me something almost exactly what happened to me had happened to her. She had gotten into a fight with her mom and had run out of her house in a fit, and the exact same thing went down. After it, she said she had chronic migraines and could sometimes hear this crazy noise in her head. She hugged me and said it was going to be all right, and that she didn't mean to get mad at me, but please just do not run off again. I hugged her back and apologized for being a jerk, and I said I wanted to get a job to help pay for things, and that day I went to the McDonald's in our town and scored some work. But that's not where this ends. Everything was getting better. My mom got a really great job that paid very well at a law office, so she could quit her other job. My littlest brother went into preschool, and my other brother was in school, and I was getting ready to take the SATs. I was playing basketball and baseball at school, and working a few hours at night, and then longer shifts on the weekends at the McDonald's when I could. One night, in April of 2002, I finished a closing shift and was eating a cheeseburger just walking home. It was around 11:30, and I started to hear that strange noise that I heard before. At first I thought it was a scooter or something coming up the street behind me, but when I turned, there was nothing there. I saw a weird guy at the corner of my street just standing at the post box, and I thought I'd cut across a few backyards to avoid this guy. I hopped over a neighbor's fence and started making my way when I saw two little men who looked like the things that I had seen before. They were around the side of a pool that I was going past, and before I knew it, I was out like a light. I woke up about an hour later with the weird guy sitting next to me with my mom asking what happened. Sounds typical, but he was wearing a black suit and sunglasses. Mind you, again, this is the middle of the night. And after I told him what happened, he said he worked for some place with the government and said not to tell anyone about it, but he'd be back tomorrow to talk to me. He never came back. Anyway, that's all I got. Every once in a while I'll hear that strange noise in my head, but nothing else has happened since then, and I'm now 34. Creepy Thing Outside by Lauren O. One night, me and my girlfriends were watching Charlie's Angels in my basement. I was having a sleepover, and it was just the four of us watching TV, eating popcorn and Pepsi, and making prank phone calls to boys we knew at school. My mom finally came down and told us to settle down. We all knew that that wasn't going to happen. We were all 15 at the time, and we were just being silly girls. Earlier, we'd been doing each other's hair and nails and talking about school and guys, and my one friend kept asking about this guy Brian who lived in my neighborhood. She had a serious crush on him, so even though it was now like 10:30 at night, we called him, and he answered. He told us to come over. It was only on the next block over from my house. I knew my mom would kill us if she knew what we were doing, so instead of going out the door, I got a stepladder and put it up to our basement window that we could crawl out of. In our nightgowns, we were laughing and trying to be quiet as we helped each other out of the window onto my driveway. We were going to run over to Brian's window and talk to him. I just remember it was cool out, and we were cold in our nightgowns, but we wanted to just run over, say hi, and then get back to my house. Oh, the rush you get when the things you think you're doing and being a rebel when you're a kid. We got over there, and Brian was at his window. We all talked for a few minutes, and then my friend said she wanted to talk to Brian by herself, so if the rest of us could just go hurry up and walk down to the sidewalk, that'd be great. We were all getting cold. We told her to hurry up, and we would wait for her. That's what we all heard, and we still talk about it to this day, this whooshing sound above us. And we saw a weird plane or something with just one red light on it stop above us. We whispered loudly to our friend that we had to get going, and she said okay and came running over. Before we could even turn around to go back to my house, we saw this green midget-shaped thing across the street, kind of gliding towards us. It wasn't walking or running, it was just kind of floating and moving towards us. We all didn't say anything and just ran back to my house. It was a crazy scramble going back through my basement window, but we all got in. I closed the window and latched it, and then right then, these weird green hands slapped up on the glass. One of my friends screamed, and another slapped a hand over her mouth and told her to be quiet. Of course, my mom came down and asked what the heck was going on, and we said we just saw something scary on TV. She told us to settle down again and then went back upstairs. We all looked over, but the hands were gone from the window. I said we all needed to relax and watch Saturday Night Live. Around midnight, there was a slap on the window again, and the hands were back, with a face that had two big eyes looking in at us. Before any of us could scream, I said for everyone to be quiet. I got up, turned off the TV, and we all sat in the dark looking at this thing. Then we heard that whooshing noise again, very loud this time, much louder than before. We could hear it as we sat in the basement. The thing at the window went away, and it didn't come back. The next day after we woke up, after talking about it all night, we could hear my dad talking to my mom about some weird soupy stuff outside of his car and the basement window. He said it was some kind of green slime, and he was angry that it was all over the side of his car and started bitching about the neighborhood boys. Now he'd have to wash everything. We all looked at each other and wondered what the heck we had seen. I don't know about my friends and their families, but I never mentioned what happened that night to my parents until I was in my early 40s at Thanksgiving. Of course, it was always a topic with us, but I never spoke about it until then. Whatever that thing was that followed us home after that sound we heard, whatever you are, let's not meet. Thing from the UFO, submitted by Crystal, not Crystal Gale. Hi, my name is Crystal, and this happened in 1985. Scariest thing that has ever happened to me. I was driving home from a high school party, totally sober by the way. I was the deputy dog that night. I had the windows down, a smoke in my hand, and my two girlfriends were in the back seat of my Horizon singing along to Home Sweet Home by Motley Crue. Don't make fun of us. I was a metal girl, and we were all huge fans. Anyways, I was driving on the I-3 in Indiana going back to North Vernon, and suddenly this light popped up on the right side of my car. Not like directly next to it, but like off in the fields, the crops we were driving along. My friend Terry saw it and laughed and said it was a cop helicopter out looking for drunk girls, and we all started cracking up. The light went off, and I kept driving along when all of a sudden, the light was on the road about 100 feet in front of our car. There was no one else out driving, but I slammed on the brakes, and all of the fun we were having came to a stop. Janelle stopped my tape player, and we all just watched as this light played all over the road. Like I said, I had the window down, but we kind of heard a strange noise, not like a plane going overhead, but just this really weird noise that we could never explain. We just kept watching this bright light going all over the road. Before I could say anything, Terry said, "What the hell is that?" And the next moment, the light was all over us. It was like we were on stage at a Motley Crue concert, and the spotlight was on Vince Neil. I mean, it was so bright I had to close my eyes for a second. There was a flash, and the light went out, and we all started to talk about police helicopters trying to scare us. Janelle was on the left-hand side of the back seat, and she started to giggle that it was all a dream. I mean, she was a little bit more than tipsy after the party. But a second later, she started to scream, and Terry and I jumped up and asked, "What?" I turned around and saw this creature standing right outside her window. It was like this whitish gray thing with giant black eyes, and it had what I sort of guessed was a finger on the window. I hit the gas, but I didn't realize that I'd put my Horizon in neutral, so the engine just revved. But it made such a loud noise that this thing turned and went into the trees of this place called the Crossley Fish Center. It's kind of a wildlife refuge. We all screamed again. I put the car into gear and sped away. Janelle was literally going crazy and yelled out, "Look at that blue beam! There's a blue beam!" And I slowed down. I had to crane my neck around, but all three of us saw a dark shape in the sky with a blue beam coming down onto the ground. Then it shut off, and the dark shape shot off across the sky and didn't come back. I hit the gas again and drove to my parents' house on Oak, and my friends decided to stay the night at my place. I don't know what that thing outside the car was, but it looked a lot like the alien things you see on the History Channel. I don't think it was trying to get into the car, but I do think it was looking at us for a specific reason. As I look back, now it's kind of funny, and any time I hear Motley Crue, I think of that night, think of that thing in the sky, and that weird thing we saw outside of my car. Strange Action in the Forest, submitted by Lone Walker 100. This happened to my best friend and me. I'll call my friend Paul. We were backpacking in northern Pennsylvania, I never really told anybody about this for fear of what might happen after our encounter out there, but Paul and I continued to talk about it after all these years. The first night, things went very well, and we were enjoying our time just traipsing around and having the awesome feeling of being out in the forest. We didn't see any other hikers. It was late in the fall, and there weren't too many other people around, so the trails were pretty much ours. Our second night, we stopped for the day and decided to just pitch our tents and start a fire. We used our little camp stoves for food, but this time we decided to have a campfire. I got some brush and other things together while Paul cooked us up some noodles and soup. We planned on being out there for a little while longer, just a couple of days, and we were actually going to be heading home the day after next. We got the fire going and our meal. We were just talking away with the sounds of the forest, and when the fire died down, it was a little after midnight. We decided to hit the hay. Right before we did, though, there was a huge flash of light, and what I can only call a ball of fire that screamed right over our heads. Paul yelled out that he thought it was a plane crash, but I knew that was not really what it was. There was a terrifically loud boom, and we could feel the ground shake underneath us. I yelled out, "I wonder if that was a meteor or something." We both decided that it would be a good idea to go check it out. I mean, it was literally right over the other side of the mountain that we were on. We got our boots on, put on headlamps, and started making our way up the trail, and as we got higher up, we could see the lights from what looked like a big fire, and we stopped for a minute. I said, "Man, we should find somebody and tell them about this." But Paul said he thought that anyone within a 20-mile radius would for sure have heard that boom and seen the flash in the sky. At that point, the fire was pretty big. When we got over the top of the hill, the trees were so thick we couldn't see much, but there was still a dying glow in the sky. We went on for about a half a mile before the trail started dipping low and came to a clearing at a turn. From this vantage point, we could see that the fire was slowly going out, and the trees in the center of where this thing hit had branches still on fire. Something looked like it was half buried in a now clear patch next to the creek. Paul wanted to get a closer look, but I wasn't sure. I mean, we had no idea if it was a plane or something else, but he just kept insisting that we should go look. I gave in, and we made our way quickly down the trail, and where it hooked left, we knew we had to go right to get closer to the object. Luckily, I'd been out there before and knew there was a fire road that ran alongside the creek on our side of it. The plane or whatever it was that had crashed was on the other side of the creek. We made our way through the woods, and after about 5 minutes we jumped over a ditch and started up the road to see what we could see. It was dead quiet out there, but we could still hear a fire crackling a little bit farther ahead of us, with the still burning trees. Before we could get there, though, from behind us we heard a vehicle or vehicles racing up the road. We turned and could see these white flashing lights flying up the bumpy road. We jumped into the ditch and then scrambled up off the road, into the trees, and watched as a bunch of dark vehicles went by with those lights flashing on the roofs of their vehicles. We hunkered down as we had no idea what those trucks were, who these people were, and we whispered as the flatbed went by, "What the hell is this?" If anyone is wondering, we had turned off our headlamps. There were no fire trucks. There were no local police or state police, just these dark-colored trucks. Paul said, "We gotta go check this out closer," and I said, "Fuck that." But after a minute, again, he convinced me we should go. We got back on the road and said we'd jump into the woods if the same thing happened if anybody else came along. By now our eyes were used to the dark, and with the aid of a clear sky, we didn't really need to turn our lamps on to get down the road. After a short walk, we heard a lot of voices shouting and the sounds of trucks crossing the shallow water. We ditched into the woods on the near side of the creek and sat in the growth right across from whatever had come down from the sky. There were a bunch of guys swarming around, something we couldn't see, and others were using fire extinguishers on the ground and also onto the trees to put out the fire. Paul said, Those guys are wearing gas masks, man. And he was right. They were. This whole thing came out of some sci-fi flick. It was just silly to me. But then we heard a louder noise and another big truck coming up the fire road behind us. It got to the creek and we saw it dip in, cross over, and on the back of it was one of those really big bucket loaders. The men all seemed to stop doing what they were doing, which was God knows what, while the smaller group of men talked, and finally one shouted and pointed over to where the thing was. I mentioned to Paul that it was funny that no local authorities were out there yet, and he just said, "Yeah, you're right." To make this long story shorter, this backloader thing backed off the truck and started working around where we were sure this thing was resting. We sat in the cold and dark for about an hour as this crew yanked something out of the ground and got it onto the large flatbed. Then another team of guys got to work throwing chains and straps or whatever, I guess, over to hold it down. The backloader got back on its truck, and these strange guys just started to make their way back across the creek. We went through the woods back to the road, but stayed a ways back in the trees as they passed by. When the flatbed slowly went past, we could make out what looked like a missile with a large ball on the end of it. The ball was covered in something. It wasn't canvas or plastic, it was this shiny material. I couldn't say what it was. Right before it passed, behind the truck there was a loud shout from a truck, and Paul and I thought we were busted. But after another minute, the truck started moving again, and I should say that they didn't have their lights on this time as they left. We waited there for about another half hour, and Paul said, "Hey, let's go and see what happened." Again, I protested, and this time I said, "Man, for all we know, that was some kind of radioactive missile." He finally saw the wisdom in this, and we made our way back to our camp. I cannot stress throughout all the talk that we had, the fact that no one else came out there that night was our biggest talking point. It was hard to sleep, but we finally did, and when we got up, we did our hiking prep, and after breakfast started off on our next trek. Paul kept bringing up how we should go back and see what had happened, and I told him to just let it go for now. We could come back another time by car and see what there was. We were out there hiking for another day and made the loop to get back to my pickup. The two of us kept talking a lot about things, but mostly about what we had witnessed. All kinds of ideas were bounced around, and some made us burst out laughing. I said it was part of the Statue of Liberty's vibrator that somehow shot off her and landed way out here. And we still laugh at that one when we get together and talk. A couple of weeks later after this, I did some research and found a whole bunch of stuff on a strange crash in Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, which wasn't too far away, but it certainly had nothing to do with what we had witnessed. The Kecksburg case is a huge case in the UFO alien world from what I read about, but I couldn't expound on that any much more than what I read. A couple of years later, Paul went back there and took pictures of the crash site, now long overgrown with weeds and brush. The impact crater is still there, with a mound of dirt pushed up pretty high, over 10 feet, like a little hill next to the creek. I still wonder who those guys who showed up were. Was it the Army? The Air Force? Maybe some guys from some propulsion lab retrieving a failed project? I don't know of anything like that around here, but who knows in this world what is real and what isn't. I mean, for all I know, some storefront in a small little town is actually a front for something stranger. At the end of the day, I never saw a newspaper or TV report about the actions of that night. Zip. Zilch. What we saw was like it never really happened, but we know it did. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If at any time you have a scary story that you would like to share then hear narrated on my channel, email unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. Please like, share, and subscribe if you haven't. Hit the little notification bell so you'll know every time that I upload. And follow me on social media. All the links to that are below in the description. Also asking for your input, whether it's here or on social media, about videos. And specifically what I mean is a still image versus an actual motion video on what I do. I'm looking to try to create more, but with the bandwidth that I have, with my wife working from home, me doing my thing, trying to do this and raise a child, it's a little bit harder to do, and I'm sick and tired of the rendering that it takes to do the videos. So let me know, okay? In the meantime, while we're all going through this craziness, I hope you're all safe, be excellent to each other, stay safe, wash your hands, and until next time, remember, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.